know I've arrived. Welcome, guys. Welcome to the team. Let's get going. So if you're in the lobby, grab your donut and your coffee. Let's get in your table. So I just have this effect on the whole sound system. Yeah, it's kind of a presence thing. Well, welcome again. This is week 5 out of 24. We're getting into the heart of our season, and I think you noticed I hope you noticed in my email last week, I just looked out, and it just seemed really full, a lot of full tables, and so I did kind of a quick, almost not really an estimate, but a head count, and I think we set our all-time record at team last Friday morning with 231 guys in the room. We have like 250 or 60 guys registered, but having that many guys here was kind of cool to see, and we always want to try to find ways to have more guys, so if you're still thinking about inviting guys, we'll find ways by combining tables, whatever, so we'll keep working at that, but that's been fun to see. A couple things as we start. Don't forget to sign in on your table list. That's the way we keep track of everybody. Make sure your email's correct there. The prayer notes that you guys signed last week are done, so I have some up here, and there's some on the table in the lobby. And how we use these, in case you're new, is if you mention something to me for prayer, or just around your table, you prayed for somebody that you have contact with or know where they live, or you can mail to them or take them this note. It's just a note that lets people know that they've been prayed for. And it seems like a simple thing, but we've had so many really, really good comments and responses to these. People who put them on the refrigerators, keep them by their hospital beds. So if you mention somebody, you want to pick up one of these, just write their name on it, and it's got a whole bunch of signatures. It's like the Declaration of Independence. It's kind of a cool thing. So we have copies, so you can get those if you're ready. The other thing is on your table, there's a little sheet called Schools for Haiti. You'll remember a couple of years ago now in the fall, we did a shoe drive. This is a group that Bob Miller, team guys, involved with, and it's a school in Haiti for 800 students, and just by contributing our gently used old shoes, we can make a difference in that part of the world. And I have a son who's been very involved with Haiti over the years, so it's a cool thing. So what we're going to do is do it again. We're going to do another shoe drive. A couple of years ago, team was able to collect 1,781 pairs of shoes, and Table 22 is the winner of the competition. They raised 380 pairs of shoes by themselves. I don't know if that same table is together right now or not, but we're going to have a little competition. So between now and November 16th, that's the Friday morning before Thanksgiving break, that's when we're going to collect all the shoes. So when you're around home, I'll remind you in emails, start looking for the old bins of shoes, maybe sneak into your wife's closet. No, I'm just kidding about that. You probably ought to get permission before you do that, but if you're like me, there's bins of shoes laying around, and so we're going to collect shoes. So gently used old shoes, children's shoes, adult shoes, whatever, and start putting them together. Don't bring them here until the 16th. Just collect them in your house, put them in bags, boxes, whatever, and then on the 16th, there's going to be a trailer right out there in front of this building, and we'll have a bunch of guys out there loading them up, and it was really kind of a fun thing last time. We took pictures and stuff, and we'll load them all up, we'll count them all up, and we'll have a winning table for the most shoes contributed, okay? Everybody at that table gets a brand new car. No, it'll be something like that. Maybe, right, Bob? No, maybe free donuts, or I don't know what we'll give you, but we'll do some sort of competition, so keep that in mind. Take it with you to remind you. I'll remind you in emails. We're going to collect shoes again this year. All right, here's our story. You got to pay attention. This is a short one, okay? I picked up a hitchhiker last night. He seemed kind of surprised that I would pick up a total stranger on the side of the road. He said, "Thanks for stopping, but why would you pick me up? How do you know I'm not a serial killer?" I said, "Because the chances of 2 serial killers being in the same car would be astronomical." That one made me laugh. Okay. Session 5, we're calling this session Naked and Afraid. Unfortunately, I'm not showing you a clip from that show. Have you ever watched that show, by the way, Naked and Afraid? It came out a couple years ago, and I really couldn't believe the premise. I didn't really think it was true, so I watched an episode, and while I'm watching it, I kept thinking to myself, who would do that? Really, who would do that? What kind of person, and then it hit me, what kind of person watches a show like that? So I haven't watched it since. We're going to look at a movie clip today from from a Clint Eastwood old Western, been out, I don't know now, 20 years. Unforgiven is the name of the movie. It's a Clint Eastwood, Gene Hackman film. I think Morgan Freeman's in it as well. But it's the story of a guy named William Money and another guy named Little Bill Daggett. William Money is played by Clint Eastwood. Bill Daggett is played by Gene Hackman. He's called Little Bill. And at the end of this movie, Little Bill has killed one of William Money's friends, and Money comes for revenge. So let's watch the clip.
Yesterday, you get one drink for that, too. All right, hold it. Now, hold it. Now, that's two. But after that, it comes out of your own pocket. You hear me, Skinny?
Yes, sir.
All right. We're pulling out early in the morning. We're going to chase these fellas clear down to Texas. Oh, don't spend too much of your own money, right? We're going to divide up into 4 parties. And we'll hit all the farms and the trails to make a big circle. And we're bound to come across somebody who's seen these skunks.
Who's the fella who owns this? You, fat man. Speak up.
I own this establishment. Bought it from Greeley for $1,000.
You better clear out of there.
Yes, sir. Just hold it right there. Hold it! Well, sir, you are a cowardly... You just shot an unarmed man.
Well, he should have harmed himself. He's gonna decorate his saloon with my friend.
You'd be William Money out in Missouri. Killer of women and children.
That's right. I've killed women and children. Killed just about everything that walks or crawled at one time or another. And I'm here to kill you, Little Bill. For what you did to Ned. You boys better move away.
I didn't want to show you the rest of that because it's not like a pre-breakfast thing to watch, but he says there, I've killed pretty much everything that walked or crawled at one time or another, and I'm here to kill you, Little Bill. And then he does, but right before he does, Little Bill says, I don't deserve to die like this. And William Money says, deserves got nothing to do with it. And then he ends his life. Unforgiven is a great title for that movie if you have watched it and seen it, because if you carry unforgiveness to its logical conclusion, what you have is death. If you carry unforgiveness to its logical conclusion, what you have is death. Last week we began the epic story in the Old Testament about these two brothers, Jacob and Esau. And let me just bring you up to speed. Esau foolishly sells his birthright because he's hungry. And Jacob, rather than protect his brother from his own foolishness, gladly takes the birthright. Years later, Jacob then steals the blessing that rightfully belongs to Esau. He does so by lying to his elderly father, Isaac. In his anger and bitterness, Esau vows to someday kill his brother for what he's done to him. And that's where we left the story off. We're picking it up again today for part 2. 20 years or so go by. We're not exactly sure how long, but 20 years or so go by. Esau has long since left the area. Jacob has become fabulously wealthy by ancient standards by working for his father-in-law Laban, but time comes for him to leave as well. And while he's journeying, he receives word that Esau is on his way to meet him, and they're on collision course. It's been 20 years since the vow, I'm going to kill my brother, okay? So Jacob thinks Esau is finally coming for his revenge, and it makes sense. So we're going to pick up the story in Genesis chapter 32. Let me read through, and I'll teach you a little bit as I go. Genesis 32, Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir in the country of Edom. He instructed them, "This is what you are to say to my lord Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban and have remained there till now. I have cattle and donkeys, sheep and goats, male and female servants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord that I may find favor in your eyes." Now, what he's doing here is trying to appease Esau. He thinks Esau's coming for revenge. He's hinting to him, I have a lot of stuff. I have a lot of wealth. I can now pay you back some of what I took from you. Verse 6, when the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you with 400 men, and 400 men are with him." Uh-oh, right? Sheep didn't work. Esau's on his way, and he's angry, and he's got 400 dudes with him. 7, in great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, and the flocks and herds and camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that's left may escape. He's so sure Esau is intent on revenge that he wants to make it harder for Esau to kill everyone. So he breaks them into groups. That's his strategy. So the first thing we see is, I'm going to pick up the story a little bit later. First thing we see is that judgment is coming. Jacob believes judgment is coming. My wife and I have 4 sons, as most of you know. They're all in their 20s now, and they're great friends, and they always have been, but they had their moments of predictable sibling rivalry. For example, the 2 younger boys especially had their butting head moments. And one story one of my favorite stories is at the time when our youngest, who was pretty cheeky when he was little, when he was 5, 6 years old, just cheeky, full of personality and all that stuff. And he loved to bug the brother just older than him. So the youngest one is Canaan, and one just older than him was Micah, 2 years older, just under 2 years older. And the younger one just loved to just irritate the heck out of the one just older. And the older boy was just a little calmer and patient by nature, and he wasn't prone to fight back. We had taught the boys, you don't resolve your conflicts with fighting and violence, you resolve with your words and all that. And he really was like that. But the younger one, he just went after him and was asking for it. One day he was really into it, and I could tell the older brother was getting more and more frustrated, but he wouldn't fight back. He wouldn't hit him or anything. But the younger one's just really being a pain. So at one point I stopped him and said something like, "Canaan, you need to be careful, because if you don't stop bugging your brother, I'm going to tell him he can just pummel you." And that was the word I used, pummel. It just sounded less violent than, So I said pummel. And they both looked, Micah was right there. They both looked at me with kind of these surprised looks. Canaan's surprised look was like, "You wouldn't really do that, would you?" A little bit fearful. And Micah was like, "Really? I get to pummel him?" Like that. And just a few minutes later, the younger one did the same thing again. Just bugged his older brother. So I said, "I warned you, buddy. Micah, you can pummel him." And the younger boy just took off running, like up the stairs trying to hide, and the older one just chased after him. And I went after him to see what was going to happen, and he pummeled him. He pummeled him. I didn't get too bad, but he taught him a lesson. I wanted the younger brother to know there were consequences to that kind of behavior, and I wanted to know that judgment was coming. Judgment was coming. Here in this story, Jacob knows a pummeling is coming, and maybe much worse than that. He knows what he did to Esau years earlier. He remembers Esau's vow to get revenge, and he can only assume that judgment is on its way. And then we see the surprise of grace. That's the second point today, the surprise of grace. Now, if you spent any time at all in the Old Testament, a few years ago we did a whole series on the Old Testament called Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But the Old Testament is a wild and woolly place. It's a picture of the ancient world, ancient peoples, a world that was often disturbingly bloody and violent, and it's hard to know what to do with it. But the Old Testament is really the history of the Jewish people. It's a story of God's redemptive work in the world, starting with ancient Israel and through the prophets until the coming of the Messiah, the king who would be the sacrifice for the sins of the world. That's the story of the New Testament. But we really only can understand the Old Testament and all the stuff in there in light of the New Testament and the story of Jesus, his death and resurrection. That's the culmination of the whole story arc of the Bible. Or else the Old Testament really makes no sense at all. It's just tough to understand and to read, other than a book of just ancient, weird stories about ancient people. But if the Old Testament is a precursor to what God is eventually, ultimately going to do through Jesus, then here and there we see sort of shadows or postcards or hints about what God is up to. And here in this story, right here, we see what I'm calling the surprise of grace. Pick it up in Genesis 33. Now, before I read this, I'll remind you that right at the end of chapter 32, we're not going to cover this part of the story today, but there's a beautiful and strange little story. Jacob fears Esau's coming. He sends his entire group that's with him ahead over a river, and he spends the night alone. Whether he's just scared or what we don't really know. But during that night, a stranger leaps out on him and wrestles with him through the night. Later we find out the stranger's God, and he wrestles with Jacob until he dislocates his hip, but then he gives him a blessing. But that little story is tucked away in there. It's worth a whole session on its own, but we're not going to cover it today. But that's already happened. Genesis 33. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau, coming with his 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, his 2 wives, that's a story for a different time, and 2 female servants. He put the female servants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. Now, I want you to see the picture here. Jacob is terrified. There are some scholars who think that he actually sent the women and children ahead as sort of a shield for himself. Others aren't sure that happened, but whatever the case is, he bows down to the ground 7 times before the brother he thinks is coming for revenge. So you can see how scared he is. Now comes the surprise, verse 4. But Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. Didn't see that coming. And he threw his arms around his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. Who are these with you, he asked. Jacob answered, they are the children God has graciously given your servant. See, it had been so long, Esau didn't even recognize Jacob's own children, his brother's children. Verse 6, then the female servants and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all, Joseph and Rachel, they too bowed down. Esau asked, what's the meaning of all these flocks and herds I met? To find favor in your eyes, my lord, he said. But Esau said, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. No, please, said Jacob, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Please accept the present that was brought to you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all I need. And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Then Esau said, let's be on our way. I'll accompany you. Now, the word grace means unmerited favor. Grace is the gift you don't deserve and could never earn. And grace is the very center of the New Testament, the story of Jesus, and what we call the gospel. The Apostle Paul in the book of Romans says, while we were yet sinners, while we were hostile toward God, Christ died for us. That's grace. By the grace of Christ, the gospel says we receive new hearts through the forgiveness of sin, new identity by being adopted as God's children, new purpose to serve in his eternal kingdom, and new destiny to reign with him forever in new heaven and new earth, what we call heaven. That's what it means to be born again. Now think about Jacob for a moment, way back in the Old Testament. How did Jacob originally pursue God's favor and blessing? We covered this last week. Up to this point in his life, he just took it. He just took what he wanted. If he needed to steal it, he stole it. If he needed to trick someone to get it, he tricked them. He took it on his own merits. What happens here? Grace, favor, it's a gift he can't deserve or earn. Verse 4, but Esau ran to meet Jacob and embraced him. He threw his arms around his neck and kissed him. I wonder, does anyone recognize that verse? Here's a hint. Can you think of a place in the New Testament where that exact thing happens? Okay. The story of the prodigal son in Luke chapter 15. Jesus tells a story of the prodigal son. A man has two sons. Younger son is a rebel, demands his inheritance early, goes out and spends his entire inheritance on wild living and women, winds up living with the pigs. Eventually comes to his senses and trudges home, having spent all the inheritance. And here's the verse we read as Jesus tells the story. But while he, the younger son, was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. Almost word for word what happens in the story of Jacob and Esau. Then the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to the servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. The surprise of grace. And that leads thirdly to the anatomy of forgiveness. I want to talk a little bit about forgiveness today. We see in Esau's response, if we're paying attention, that somewhere along the line, he forgave his brother. Don't know exactly when it happened or how it happened. That part of the story is not told. But we know that when Jacob sends all those gifts to his brother, Esau goes, what's with all the sheep? What's with all the stuff? Oh, I wanted to give these to you. Well, okay, I guess. But he threw his arms around him and kissed him before he knew anything about that. He forgave Jacob before Jacob apologized, before Jacob offered the gifts. Somehow, some way, he had let go of his need for revenge, his right to revenge. He was no longer a prisoner of his own bitterness and of Jacob's deceitfulness, but notice, Jacob was the one still trapped in his own fear of judgment. Jacob, the one who needed to be forgiven, is still trapped because he's fearful. Three things about forgiveness. First, forgiveness is never deserved or earned. Forgiveness is never deserved or earned. Sometimes we think that we can only forgive someone if they apologize for what they did, or if they do something to show they're really, really sorry. That's what Jacob was trying to do. We think if I forgive so-and-so for such and such, then I'll just be letting them off the hook. Now, it's easier to forgive when someone apologizes and recognizes what they've done, but the truth is, forgiveness can never, ever be earned. It's never deserved. For example, someone does or says something that hurts one of my children. They can never, never do something to undo that. They can never earn my forgiveness. But I can still forgive. For example, a woman came to me years ago in her 70s after a church service, in her 70s, to tell me that she had been horribly abused by a family member when she was 9. She carried that her whole life, never told anyone. The people who did that to her were long dead. Nobody could apologize. How does she forgive? Is it possible or not? Fortunately, it is possible. Now, no, forgiveness is not condoning. It always begins with naming the sin, the wrong. This really happened, and there's nothing you can do to say or deserve my forgiveness. Jesus modeled this from the cross. He said, Father, forgive them. They don't even know what they're doing. Nobody apologized to Jesus when he was on the cross, yet he forgave. Side note, forgiveness is not the same as no consequences. People get this confused too. If my son gets an fender bender in my car, I can forgive him and at the same time ask him to work to pay that damage. Forgiveness is forgiveness is not the same thing as no consequences. Forgiveness just lets someone go let someone go from the promise of revenge or retribution. Okay. Secondly, forgiveness is always a gift. If it can never be deserved, it's always a gift. Forgiveness is always a gift. It's a gift to the other person because it releases them from your right to retribution and revenge. But maybe more importantly, forgiveness is a gift to yourself because it sets you free from bitterness. Forgiveness is letting go of both the person and the wrong that they did. That's what somehow Esau has managed to do. Forgiveness is refusing to carry another person's sin in the form of bitterness. In other words, I give your sin back to you, and I give you back to God, who's the only one who can judge. So forgiveness is never deserved. Forgiveness is always a gift. And thirdly, forgiveness always costs something. There's a cost to forgiveness. Tim Keller, a pastor in New York City, says, forgiveness always comes at a cost to the one granting the forgiveness. To not retaliate is to absorb the cost. In this case, forgiveness cost Esau his right to revenge. He gave it up, let it go. But unforgiveness comes with a much greater cost. As we said before, unforgiveness always leads to death in a relationship especially. Now, how does this story apply to our theme, to our iron sharpening iron, the power of spiritual friendship theme? Here's why. Because I think we are all Jacob and we are all Esau. One of the reasons the story is in God's word is because we are all Jacob, meaning we have all wronged someone. We have all wronged someone and committed sin selfishly. And we're all Esau. We all have been wronged by someone. And as men, I think we struggle greatly with grace. We struggle to receive it because it's free. When we want to earn it. That's what Jacob wanted to earn back his forgiveness. Didn't realize it was free. We want to earn something. Grace is hard to receive and it's hard to offer. We struggle with forgiveness. See, our culture teaches us that to receive grace is somehow weak and unmanly. Our culture teaches us that to forgive is also somehow weak, that being angry and bitter is more manly. Our culture teaches us that we should just carry this stuff through our lives, and a lot of people do. When you see something happen like road rage, or what I call kick the dog syndrome, so many of us carry around bundles of stuff, and we don't know what to do with it. Well, tucked away in this story is the secret to freedom, to forgiveness, and it's grace. And if we jump ahead to the New Testament, to the gospel, to the story of Jesus, we can understand that while we were still hostile toward God, while we were still Jacob, Christ died for us. And when we realize that we are forgiven, we can then offer grace to someone else. It's the heart of this story. It's the heart of the gospel. Here's the questions I want you to deal with around the tables today. First, the conflict between Jacob and Esau lasted 20 years or so. In your opinion, which brother carried the greater burden during that time? Okay, the one who took the birthright, stole the blessing, and got everything he wanted, or the one who foolishly traded it away and lost it and lived with bitterness, wanted to kill his brother? Who carried the greater burden during those 20 years? Just have a discussion about that. Secondly, which is harder for you personally, apology or forgiveness? So which is harder, seeking forgiveness from someone you've wronged or offering forgiveness to someone who's wronged you? Just personally, which one do you find yourself struggling with more? Okay, get some coffee, get some donuts, talk about those things. And by the way, during this time of discussion, if you have a prayer request you want to give me, I'm hanging around up here. You can write it down for me. We'll pray for it at the end. So wrap you up right about 6:50.
Request for